So good evening to you all. A warm welcome to the panelists and the audience who have joined for another session of Case Capsule. Now, as I was trying to search my database for a case capsule today, I chanced upon this particular case. Though I was convinced that this could very well be an interesting case and a lot of learning points, but there are only 3 or 4 photographs, not more than that. This is an old case. So I was having my own apprehension whether this will interest the Facebook audience, LGS audience, but contrary to my apprehension, the comments and the response that I got for today morning's Facebook page seems to be that my decision was correct. Another reason I want to post this case is I want to have some kind of discussion regarding TTube and TTube, all those things from the panelists, because the younger generation are not fully exposed to the management with the TTube. And many a times when we sit in the examination and give a X-ray of TTube cholangiogram, it seems to fumble. That's the reason I thought I'll use this opportunity to tell something about the concept of TTube and TTube cholangiogram, everything. Now, we all know that with the advent of expertise of interventional endoscopy, the indications of TTube CBD exploration has come down drastically. Even in those occasions where we have to do a CBD exploration, we always try to close the bile duct over a biliary stent, and we always try to avoid a T-tube, because T-tube is definitely not a panacea. It comes with a lot of significant complications, and it's more of a nuisance and morbidity because this tube is going to hang around for a couple of months. So with this, the first part of my presentation will be about T-tube, and I will take the opinion of the panelists for their inputs. And the second part, I'll finish that quickly, and second I'll go to the case capsule per se. Now, these are all the 10 or 12 commandments that I can recommend for a proper T-tube placement. One should always select a tube size smaller than the bile duct, which means that the surgeon should be fully aware of the dimensions of the bile duct by imaging. And not only that, the theatre should be equipped with different sizes of T-tube, and one should not go with only one size T-tube for a CBD exploration. And obviously it has to be trimmed and cut appropriately so that you can place it safely and you can pull it out safely. The proximal limb should not cross the confluence for fear of obstruction. The distal limb should not cross the ampulla for fear of pancreatitis. And this is for the postgraduates. Where will you do a choledochotomy? It has to be done just above the upper part of the duodenum, supraduodenal, for 2 reasons. The first reason is if the CBD is dilated, and after completing the CBD exploration, you can convert this into a choledochoduodenostomy. The second important reason is that if by any chance you have ended up in a complication of a T-tube in the form of stricture, it is better that the T-tube entry is lower down rather than close to the hilum. The next point is the choledochotomy should be close to watertight. There should not be any bile leak. And the T-tube should make an exit through the shortest and the straightest route to the abdominal wall. And there should not be tension, which means that you can have dislocation of the tube, and there should not be redundancy, in which case you will not get a good tract formation. It should be properly fixed to the skin, and always you'll have to keep a drain in the subhepatic, because we know there is a dislocation of the tube in the immediate postoperative period is a well-known complication. I want the panelists, after I finish these few slides, to chip in with information which can either add or subtract or modify any one of these tenets. And we all know that these are all the tube that is we are using in modern day practice. It's a plastic tube, and there is a latex rubber tube is also available. The importance of knowing about these 2 tubes is that it doesn't produce much tissue reaction. And because they are not going to produce tissue reaction, the tract formation takes long time. So one cannot remove the T-tube early. I think the previous generation was using a red rubber T-tube. I have not seen one, and I want the seniors to comment about it, whether they have used and seen this red rubber T-tube. That produces severe tissue irritation, and tract formation seems to happen quickly. That's the reason why if you read old textbooks, it says that you do a T-tube cholangiogram on the 10th postoperative day. If everything is fine, you can remove the T-tube on the 11th postoperative day. But unfortunately, with these tubes, you cannot pull out the tube on the 11th day. You have to wait for a long time. This is a question for the quiz question for the postgraduates who are listening. What is a Whelan-Moss T-tube? If we'll have this discussion going for half an hour to 45 minutes, and at the end of this presentation, somebody can answer correctly what is a Whelan-Moss tube. I have not seen or used this, but I want to just as a quiz question. Now, this T-tube also, I told you about trimming the T-tube. This has to be done. The dorsal part of the T-tube has to be removed, which means that you are converting this tube into an incomplete hollow cylinder. And not only that, you have to bend the tube at this point as well as this point, which will result in 4 dog ears. And all these 4 dog ears has to be trimmed. If you do that only, the tube will go into the bile duct easily, and when you pull it out, it will fold on itself and come out easily. Now, as far as the management protocol of T-tube is concerned, I'll tell my plan of management, and I always welcome for a difference of opinion from the panelist. I start clamping the T-tube from the 5th postoperative day. And initially I clamp for 1 hour every 3 or 4 times a day. And I always tell the staff nurse and the resident to look for a new onset of pain, a new onset of fever, a new onset of peritubal bile leak. If any one of them manifests, they have to unclamp the tube. If the patient tolerates the T-tube clamping, then progressively every day we increase the T-tube clamping, and on the 10th postoperative day, probably you can clamp the tube for 24 hours. Maybe on the 11th or 12th day, you can do a T-tube cholangiogram. If everything is fine, then you can plan for a T-tube removal at a variable period of time, not immediately. So that is my protocol of T-tube management. And as far as the T-tube cholangiogram is concerned, what are all the things you are going to look in the T-tube cholangiogram? You have to look for both the intra as well as extrahepatic biliary system. You have to see the contrast is freely flowing into the duodenum. There should not be any contrast leak, and there should not be any filling defect suggestive of residual stones. These are all the important points that one will have to look at the T-tube cholangiogram. Now, when will you remove the T-tube? I will not remove the T-tube before 4 weeks. I will try to delay it still further for fear of, because these tracts are not, these tubes doesn't form a very, very good tract. So I want the opinion of the panelists regarding this particular point also. I have seen a case where even after 8 weeks, they removed the T-tube and patient developed a peritonitis, and patient needs to be taken for an ERCP and stenting. So I want the panelists to answer. And as far as if you see residual stones in the bile duct, there is a technique called Burheen's technique where you retain the T-tube for longer time, dilate the tract, and then do an instrumentation and remove the stones. Neither I have seen this technique or I have done it myself. I have seen only in the book. Once again, I want the panelist opinion regarding this. And these are all the list of complications that a T-tube can lead to. The early postoperative period can be a displacement that will be manifesting by the T-tube will not have much bile coming, whereas the abdominal drain will be putting out a lot of bile. That's a classical situation of a displaced T-tube. Of course, there can be bile leak, there can be infection, and after removal of the T-tube, you can have any one of these complications like a leak, a peritonitis, bilomas, a persistent fistula, which is very rare, but and delayed complications like stricture can also occur. And this is just a journal article to show the complications of, there are many publications of T-tube complications. So I just stop here. This is just a theoretical aspects of T-tube, and I want the opinion of the panelists to add some more points.
We'll start with Kannan.
Yes, sir. Any points which I have not told or which?
You have mentioned everything.
Yes, sir.
One thing, I don't clamp the T-tube. I do the cholangiogram on 8th day or 10th day.
Yes, sir.
Because once the biliary system is normal, the bile starts flowing, the amount reduces, the postoperative period. I don't clamp it.
Okay, sir.
I do this thing, and after I see that there is no filling defect, and then I clamp after the cholangiogram, I clamp the T-tube.
Okay, sir.
And another important advice is always there should be a separate abdominal drain whenever you put a T-tube, because
Yes, sir.
there's always a possibility of peritubal leak. So I have seen surgeons doing without, after keeping the T-tube, they don't keep the abdominal drain.
Yes.
That's not correct. And as you said, I don't remove the T-tube at least for a month. And before removing the T-tube, I again do a cholangiogram, because I had experience after doing, the cholangiogram after 1 month, I saw a small stone coming down from the upper biliary system, which was not picked up earlier.
Okay, sir.
Prathapan?
I also remove the T-tube with later 4 weeks. But provided the system is dilated during the initial surgery, I think we can remove it a little earlier compared to a system which is a very small bile duct. So the chances of biliary leak after T-tube removal is actually proportional to the size of the bile duct. That is what I feel.
The
So
dilated biliary,
usually I take it delayed, because the whole principle of fitting a T-tube comes from the dilatation of the system. If the system is dilated, once you remove the T-tube, there will be some overriding of the wall. But if there is no dilatation, that overriding will not happen. That is one of the theory of spontaneous closure of T-tube tract after its removal. Second point I wanted to clarify, when the postgraduates are asked, what is the first step in which you do T-tube cholangiogram? It is on table. If you have a intraoperative cholangiogram facility, and if you have done it, I think it should be on table, because if there is a stone missed in that situation, we can remove straight away. Okay.
Is that Kutyanasamy, CK Sami? If Kutyanasamy is there, he can comment. Ilango, you have anything to say?
I also don't clamp the tube. What I do is, initially it is kept on gravity drainage. Then I try to eliminate gravity, and then I raise the tube, all the while looking for pain. I've never clamped the tube. And I also delay the T-tube removal as late as possible, usually into the 4th or 5th week.
So, Shankar, I was trained in the era of T-tubes.
Yes, sir.
And those days, there was no ARCP, so all CPD stones are by, cholecystectomy, cholecystectomy, and Dr. Rangabhashan's unit, where we used to have this Dakes dilator, a graded dilator, which we used to dilate the ampulla and put in a T-tube. And I remember one case where when I pulled a T-tube, the vertical part, the longer part came out, the horizontal part remained back.
Okay.
You know what happened? How it could be? Huh?
It got snapped.
Yeah. So you have to go in again. Professor Anna has to go in again and remove it and put another T-tube. And he told specifically this time, be careful when you remove the T-tube. Now the mango cut you talked about, which is slitting the horizontal part, at the point where the vertical part joins, you have to make a V cut.
Yeah, I told that's what you.
But then the figure that doesn't. But you have to be very careful by making the V cut. But you may have one of the limbs with a very flimsy attachment, so it's possible that can go. And of course, as you said, that both end has to be tapered.
Yes.
Introducing T-tube into the bile duct is got a special technique of using a right angle and bend it. It's not very easy.
Yes.
Actually, first you have to introduce one limb, and the joint also has to go in. Then only the other limb can be introduced.
Yes.
So next thing is suturing the. We used to use Tuvo catgut. I don't know what you used to use, and invariably when we came to the uppermost part of the choledochotomy, where the vertical, the horizontal, the vertical part, the lengthier part will come out, we used to make a purse string and also anchor the T-tube. But then with catgut, it's okay. If you try to pull out, there's not a problem. But with Vicryl, that can be a problem.
Yes.
If you're doing it with Vicryl, you can only make a purse string, but don't anchor the tube to the bile duct. Now, in Dr. Nandi's unit, it's a protocol that all T-tubes are removed on the 21st day. There is a military regimen. So 21st day, you do a contrast and remove. There's no clamping. And of course, subsequently, you can put the bag on the, bed level and see and all that stuff. But then when I joined the Hyderabad unit, 1 week T-tube coloniogram removal.
Okay.
And then later on, I also started doing a thing like that. Now, regarding the Burhain's technique, actually, when I was working in Bangladesh, once I had to, my hospital has got 3 branches. In one of the branches, in the middle of the night, when I was doing a cholecystectomy, there's no T-tube. And there's no T-tube and there's no Desjardins. No, it's a terrible thing in bile duct surgery. So I had to just put an infant feeding tube and come off. And actually, one of the patients there, I had to do this Burhain's technique. Burhain's technique has got one interesting thing that when you go through the T-tube, whenever you're having a basket, you should have an additional wire inside, because when you go, if there's more than one stone, you go with the basket, catch the basket, and with the stone you come out. When you come out, the T-tube will come out.
Okay.
So to go in again is a problem. So for that, you should have a guide wire, extra guide wire. That is one of those endoscopy or cardiac catheterization techniques. These are all the points I can think of.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Anybody else to comment, please? Ubal, you want to say something? Actually, after Ubal's tribe has come in, the indication for T-tubes are just gone.
So, Ubal is joined or is there?
I'm here only.
Ubal, have you had any experience where they have removed the T-tube and patient developed biliary peritonitis and you have to go in and do a ERCP and stenting?
Invariably nowadays, I think even with the T-tube, some of the surgeons feels with the endoscopic stent in situ, they remove the T-tube. So most of the T-tube cholangiogram I have seen, they underwent an ERCP. Subsequently, post-postdoctoral CBD exploration T-tube, they underwent an ERCP and would have placed a stent.
Shankar, the point here is, even if your T-tube shows a stone at the lower end, still you can go through ERCP and remove it.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. So the Burhain's technique.
Madam will have some comment on that.
Burhain's technique is historical now.
Burhain's is historical, but we did. Madam?
I was also thinking ERCP is way forward. I remember once, I think in Stanley, we did have a snapping of the T-tube. I don't know what happened, how they managed it. But I think T-tube is less common now, with laparoscopy and cholecystectomy being done during the same procedure during laparoscopy. This placement, unless you have some bile duct injury or something.
No, but with, I think in transplant T-tubes, Funny, are you there? You want to have a word on that? Funny Krishna? Because in transplant.
In Sanjay Gandhi, there were studies that they did a HIDA scan at 2 weeks and 3 weeks after removing the T-tube, and they found that the minor leaks persisted. So it takes about 2 to 3. This thing was at 3. It takes 3 weeks to form a nice tract around the T-tube, and we remove only at 3 weeks. If at all, we put in a T-tube.
Okay.
Same philosophy as we, for any other.
Regarding T-tubes in transplant.
No, so we don't use T-tubes in transplant at all nowadays. I mean, I know some surgeons even in Hyderabad who use a cystic duct catheter but in T-tubes, I think that's like a redundant practice. Now it's not done anymore.
Thank you. Back to you, Shankar.
Yes, sir. So basically, all the surgeons agree that we will try our level best to avoid a T-tube. We try other methods like a cholecystectomy or putting a biliary stent in an antegrade fashion. Because we know T-tube is associated with a lot of complications. Now coming to the case, this is the patient who is a 50 years old gentleman who presents with symptomatic cholelithiasis. He was diagnosed as acute calculus cholecystitis, and both LFT as well as imaging studies in the form of ultrasound doesn't show any evidence of CBD stones. There are no comorbidities. And this patient was managed by a surgeon who starts with a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, but he could not make any progress in the surgery and he decides to convert. And after converting, it was a difficult cholecystectomy. And at this point, I want to stop and tell 3 important learning points or important tenets at this point. Number 1, as it stands today, there is no absolute contraindications to start a patient with a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. That is point number 1. And point number 2, if you are not making any progress in surgery, conversion is not an act of defeat. So you should not hesitate to convert. That is a point number 2. And point number 3 is very, very important. One should not be under the impression that after converting, you are going to have an easy cholecystectomy, because this pathology remains the same. And even after conversion, one should be very careful. And it will be a tedious process to do a cholecystectomy in such situations. So those are all the 3 points I want to tell. And the discharge summary was not carrying any information about the intraoperative events. Why he has to put a T-tube? Obviously, I presume that there must be some bile duct injury or bile duct transection, which he has identified, and probably he has referred it over a T-tube. Because obviously there was no CBD stones. So, of course, that was not there in the discharge summary. And what happened for the patient is everything was fine, and a T-tube cholangiogram was done on the 14th postoperative day, which I have posted here. And I want the panelists to comment about this T-tube cholangiogram. What is their opinion? And finally, 1 week later, he had a significant bleed through the T-tube. Nearly 500 ml of blood was coming through the tube into the bag. So I want the panelists to comment about this T-tube cholangiogram, both the abnormal findings or what is their opinion? What would have happened intraoperatively?
Yeah, Prathapan.
Sir, the insertion of the T-tube tract seems to be a little higher than the usual point. I think there might be some thing just like a frozen callus or something like that, and he just pulled out what is getting out of it. And meanwhile, the patient might have had an injury to the bile duct. He might have tried an end-to-end anastomosis over a T-tube.
Okay.
So that is what I feel. We cannot see any cystic duct stump or any gallbladder in that area. So that means gallbladder might have been contracted.
Okay. So definitely there is a point what you are saying. The site of entry of T-tube into the bile duct is at a higher level, which suggests that it is not a CBD exploration they have done it. It is only a damage control T-tube insertion.
Kannan?
Yeah, I also feel the same. It's like the site is at the cystic duct junction. Probably the bile duct injury and the surgeon has managed with the T-tube.
Okay, sir.
Ilango, are you there? Gautam?
There. I agree with the finding. Damage control, it is very high. But I'm not able to see the continuity also. So I think the duct was almost nearly transected. It may or may not be correct.
Okay. So definitely this area seems to be a little fuzzy, and the margins of the anatomy seems to be not clear at this point of end.
No, but my point, I agree with all the panelists that the level is, a little suspicious. But otherwise, there are no stones actually, obviously. So it's not a stone disease for which choledochotomy is done. And actually the ducts above below are filling up quite well. I mean, there isn't much of a leak. There's no leak also, very T-tubal leak. And as you rightly say, at the point where it is, the whole thing, maybe some clots or something in that area. It doesn't look normal.
Yeah, I also agree that except this part, the cholangiogram looks okay. It's a good cholangiogram where the proximal intrahepatic radicals are visualized. The distal bile duct seems to be okay, and duodenum is visualized.
There's no loss of bile duct in the first place, and a bit of hilum is also available. He's not gone too deep into the. Madam, you want to comment on that, madam?
I just want to know, where's the distal end of the T-tube? Is it still within the CBD or it's in?
Yeah, in the CBD.
It does not come to the duodenum. No? Normally you expect one limb into the duodenum.
He should not come into the duodenum, is what Shankar says.
Okay, should not come into the duodenum.
May cause pancreatitis. Ubal?
This question they always ask in the exam, the T-tube, what should be the length in the duodenum? And so
Yes, madam. That was discussed. Yeah.
Well, your comment. Anybody else from the audience, please feel free.
Most of the bleed, the hepatic artery injury from the bleed.
We'll complete, madam.
We are coming to that point, madam. Now, another point I want to tell in this particular thing is, this is a cholangiogram or a MRCP tells only about the luminal aspect of the bile duct. It doesn't tell anything about the periductal tissue. So even though the cholangiogram seems to be pretty decent, but we do not know what is happening around the bile duct. So one should never go by the cholangiogram alone, especially a preoperative MRCP. It cannot tell you the difficulty of the periductal fibrosis or inflammation like that.
Well, your comments?
Shankar, can you see a classical T-tube cholangiogram? You have some picture before, no?
This patient? No.
Not this patient.
No, I have not got ready a classical T-tube cholangiogram.
Tomorrow.
Because I feel that as surgeons felt that area looks a little abnormal, because what will happen usually is even when you going for a stricture. So that is a concern in if you remove a T-tube without a proper cholangiogram. That's the reason I think most of the time we do a ERCP stenting, then we'll remove the cholangiogram. Whenever there is some surgeon suspected a bile duct injury, transected or bile duct repaired over a T-tube, invariably they'll need to have a stenting, and subsequently they remove the T-tube, mainly to prevent the stricture formation.
Now, I think stricture formation is a rule rather than exception. It may not be a significant stricture, but the point of entry of T-tube is always. But then the thing of stent and remove, how can you put a stent and then remove the T-tube? Is there a place for that? What?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have done so many times. So that is not a problem.
Will not the stent come off with the T-tube or something?
No.
Yeah, Gautam, are you there? You have any comments on the T-tube cholangiogram?
Sir, already points have been discussed. I just wanted to make one point. Given the low confidence know of doing T-tube cholangiogram, I think the technicians are also not aware of how it's properly done. So many a times I do find a T-tube cholangiogram having air, and that is being mistaken for a stone. So it is better for us to learn how it is exactly done once, so that we don't describe an artifact as a stone. Just wanted to make a point, so that's it.
Yeah, that's
actually, Shankar, you remember we also give a shot of antibiotic when cholangiogram is done.
Yes. Because there is a cholangiovenous reflex is there. And not only for T-tube cholangiogram, what Gautam says is important for when you do an intraoperative cholangiogram also. Because otherwise you will have false positive results. Now, we'll move on. So now there is 500 ml of blood in the T-tube. What to do next?
Pradhaban. Funny, yeah.
Sir, rapid gush of blood would obviously, in a setting of a bile duct injury, must make us suspect an arterial injury. The next logical thing would be to do a urgent CT angio.
Okay. Now this,
like he correctly described, the T-tube cholangiogram doesn't show us what is going on around the bile duct.
That's correct. Now my point is this.
Shankar, you will be a little louder, Shankar.
No, there is no question of being. This is definitely a hemophilia, and this is the third week of cholecystectomy. A cholecystectomy which was difficult, and they have done something like a damage control with a T-tube, maybe the CBD repair. So what else it can be? It should be a hemophilia. Why should we go for a CT angiogram? Why can't we straight away go for an angiogram? There is no differential diagnosis in this patient. Should we spend some time on the CT angiogram, or directly we can go for a?
We'll see what the faculty feel. Pradhaban?
I think there is no harm in doing a CT angio prior to angiogram. Sometimes the aneurysm may be associated with some local pathology as well. So if you do only angiogram, you may have a leak. It may be hepatic artery injury, or it may be even cystic artery pseudoaneurysm, which might be eroding. I think an outer view of associated pseudoaneurysm is also important when you plan treatment, because we have repaired just below the cystic duct entry. That is what I feel, entry of cystic duct. It's not the exact site of usual hepatic artery. Maybe a cystic artery, we don't know, but you have to do a CT angio prior to intervention.
Yes, Gautam. Gautam.
We'll also do a CT angiogram, sir. It doesn't take much time, very quick. And I think the interventional radiologists always prefer to have at least a roadmap.
Yeah.
Need to prepare
I mean, that's a significant point. Before every conventional angio, they want a CT angio for whatever reason. Kannan?
Yeah, CT angio is fine.
Gautam?
Sir, I think one more reason, we are also looking at probably and leak. So bilioma, if it requires drainage, also needs to be taken care. So CT will give us that aspect too, rather than the conventional. So I will offer a CT angio first.
Now, actually, if you look at the blood, it looks a little darkish. Can it be a portal venous blood rather than a arterial?
Very unusual, sir. I mean, it may be the quality of the photo is not good. So it's arterial bleed only.
Okay.
And
so consensus on CT angio, Shankar.
Yeah.
Ubal, anything?
That's what I'm thinking. Whether is it necessary to do a CT angio, because as Shankar said, this is a hemophilia, third week after surgery. So obviously there is a possibility of pseudoaneurysm. So straight away, rather than wasting time, straight away a conventional angiogram.
The point is the conventional angio people, interventional radiologists would always want a CT angio before they go in. I don't know whatever the reason, but they. Mani, you agree?
No.
Yeah, so one more point, sir. So to have a map is advantage. For example, I'll tell you this situation. It's a cystic artery stump bleed. If the patient had a big replaced right hepatic artery, right, then the angiography, when it can be a bit more bolder, just occluding rather than stenting it. So it helps in that way also. It gives you a preoperative map. If the patient had a replaced right coming from the SMA or something like that, they can actually occlude the artery rather than just put a stent. So it helps them plan the procedure.
Yeah, the Bhaskaran says from the Facebook group that if the patient is unstable or bleeding rapidly, there's no room for CT angio. Go for a conventional angio straight. I think that's also a point.
That's also a valid point. Yes.
Yeah.
Shankar?
So basically, I mean, definitely we don't lose anything by doing a CT angiogram. It's a very quick procedure, and you'll always have a roadmap and information. As Dr. Bhaskaran was telling, definitely if the patient is profusely bleeding unstable, then probably we can. In this patient, somehow CT angiogram was not done. I do not know, because this is a quite old case. So that was the angiogram that was straight away done in this patient. You can see the catheter into the common hepatic artery. That's the gastroduodenal takeoff, and that's a proper hepatic. It divides into right and left, and the aneurysm is exactly sitting at the confluence of the two sectoral branches of the right hepatic artery, and probably involving the right hepatic artery proper also. So that's the this angiogram picture for you. Now, does it with this picture any inputs from the panelists considering the location of the aneurysm, and would you?
We'll start with Funny.
Sir, I mean, this kind of a patient, see, couple of, obviously this needs to be controlled. There are two ways of controlling it, whether to stent it or whether to occlude it.
Yes.
Okay. An initial attempt should because it's at the confluence, because if it's just at the bifurcation of right anterior posterior, confluence, it may be difficult to stent it if possible. But if it's not possible to stent it, the question comes, can we occlude it? I would say in a desperate situation, the patient is bleeding massively, you can occlude the right hepatic artery because the confluence has been preserved. So the patient will have fairly good collateral circulation from the left across the hilum. The main hylocollaterals are preserved.
Okay.
So with this, luckily, because there's no significant hilar injury, we still have the option of both occlusion and stenting. If stenting is not possible, we can occlude also.
Okay. So the preferred option will be to do a stenting.
Radhaban, yeah,
if it's,
we'll take
And
if it's technically
I
possible.
think covered stenting is advised rather than keeping occluding it. If it's possible, it should be stented.
Ilango?
Sir, this is covered stent at this point. If you do a covered stent, one of the sectoral branches will be occluded. So in this case, I would prefer life-saving procedure will be just occlusion.
Okay.
Because if you put on the posterior sector or the anterior sector, either one of those arteries will be blocked. It's not possible to stent properly in this case, especially a covered stent.
Okay.
Is my logic clear?
And cost-wise also stenting will be expensive.
I was wondering, will it not require a surgical intervention in terms of, localizing and repairing and bridging that?
Right now, sir?
Yeah.
No, right now, patient is having a hemophilia which has to be addressed. And that has to be obviously intervention radiology. You cannot operate right now.
Funny?
Sir, actually, so with this, in this kind of situation, I've had a couple of situations in which we have gone in and operated, sir. I agree. Like somebody put it, the patient is extremely unstable and all that. You might not even have time for an angiography. But see, it is possible that in a patient with a bile duct injury, we can go to the left of the bile duct, to the left of the bile duct, take out the common hepatic mode and identify the right hepatic artery origin, which will be relatively the virgin territory, and do it. But definitely angio is the first modality of option, but surgery is possible. The CT angio will give us a decision. If for the CT we say we don't see a big abscess and it's only a direct, injured artery has eroded into the bile duct and there's not much of abscess and inflammation, there's still a possibility of surgically going into a virgin area, dissecting from the hepatic artery, coming onto the right side and ligating the artery. We've done that successfully for a couple of patients over the years. So that's one thing. And occlusion is definitely safe, like I said, because if the confluence is patent, most probably patients will not have massive hepatic necrosis.
Okay. Now, I have
Kuttiyanasamy wants to say something. Kuttiyanasamy, what is your comment? CK Sami? Okay, Shankar. Bhaskaran also feels that a stent is ideal.
Okay.
Sami, what is that you want to say?
Sir, I'm Dr. Kulandaisamy, not Kuttiyanasamy, sir.
Sorry, I didn't know that.
Okay. Sir, I think a lot of students are listening. Obviously, we have to tell the correct message. On a rare occasion, you can go for surgery, but this is a situation which cries for only an intervention radiological procedure. The question is whether to do a stenting or occlusion. It's, I think, the technical difficulties should tell the radiologist what to do. Because if you are going to operate these patients, it will end up in a disaster because you might arrest the bleeding. You will tackle the aneurysm. But what are you going to do for the biliary pathology? And in the presence of vascular injury, you do not know what is the status of the vascularity of the biliary system. So I don't think you can try to address both the arterial problem as well as the biliary problem in a surgery. You should not do surgery. That's my opinion. I think all the panelists will agree on that. In a very desperate situation, you may do it, but generally not recommended. That's for the postgraduates and students.
We have done surgery. We have ligated the artery. We have repaired the bile duct over a T-tube. Nothing happened. See,
okay, sir.
The patient is unstable. You have to do surgery. Surgery will not injure the bile duct. I don't think bile duct will go for ischemia.
No, sir. Already the bile duct has been probably injured, and there is also a associated hepatic artery injury. So in such situations, the general teaching is try to avoid any repair of the bile duct or any hepaticojejunostomy, because we know that we do not know the ischemic process, how long it's going to move proximally. So as a teaching for the postgraduates, no surgery at the moment, only angioembolization. That's my opinion.
Agree.
Absolutely agree with you, sir.
How long does it take for the hepatic artery aneurysm to form? This is the third week, no, post surgery.
Yeah, this is pseudoaneurysm, third week, madam.
As early as third week, pseudoaneurysm.
Yeah, it can form, madam, because there may be some thermal injuries also. Usually, all hepatic artery injuries doesn't form a pseudoaneurysm. There should be some additional, some bile leak, some thermal injuries like diathermy or some injuries should be there. So this patient, for obvious technical reasons, they went for a occlusion of the aneurysm, and you can see clearly that that's a GDA, that's a common proper hepatic, and the entire right lobe of the liver, the blood supply has got occluded. And what you see is only the left hepatic artery there. So that's the end result of this embolization. And definitely, there is a point, probably it may be technically difficult to do a stenting at this confluence of the two sectoral branches. That may be because right now the main aim is to save the patient from a bleeding episode rather than worrying about other problems. So that was.
What about the issue of enzymes rising, ischemia, abscess? Is because what we understand is if the injury is distal from the hilum, it's okay if we can block it. If it's very proximal, then the chances of liver ischemia are very high.
But we don't have any other option also, sir, because that's the only thing now available. If a patient develops a liver ischemia,
what could have happened subsequently?
No, that's what I'm going to show in this case also.
Yeah.
So liver is, I mean, what are all the complications you can expect? Number one is ischemic necrosis, but that's very rare because portal vein is still supplying the liver. 70% of the oxygen supply is carried through the portal vein. But definitely there is a possibility. We are more worried about the blood supply of the bile duct rather than the blood supply of the liver parenchyma. In fact, of course, I don't think any liver transplant surgeon will agree that the concept once upon a time previously was a few decades back. There are articles which said hepatic artery can be ligated with impunity. But I don't think anyone will agree with that in the present scenario. Mostly we can get away by doing from the liver necrosis part of it, but what happens to the bile duct is always a problem. Any other complications you can expect after a hepatic artery embolization? Not necessarily in the liver. This is for the postgraduates. You can also have of course, in this patient, there is no cholecystitis because for any reason you are going to do a hepatic artery embolization in the presence of a gallbladder, then you have to make sure that the contrast material is embolic material is not entering the cystic artery. We have had one occasions where we have to do an embolization for a liver injury patient who manifested with hemophilia, and 2 days next day after the embolization he had severe right upper quadrant pain, and we did an ultrasound. It was a cholecystitis. So in this case, probably that complication is not there. Another thing is if embolic material goes into the gastroduodenal artery, then you can develop duodenal ulcers, gastric ulcers. So these are all the complications that can occur after hepatic artery embolization. Now, as far as the incidence of right hepatic artery injury in the case of cholecystectomy, post-laparoscopic cholecystectomy bile duct injuries are as high as 30 to 40%. That has been shown by this series by Jacques Belghiti from France, where they have shown an incidence of 36%. And this group from, I think from US, Stewart and Way, the famous Stewart and Way classification, they have also shown an incidence of right hepatic artery injury to the tune of 32%. So whenever you have a post-laparoscopic or post-open cholecystectomy bile duct injury, you always, in nearly 1/3 or 30 to 40% of the patients, they can have a right hepatic artery injury. This is very important because most of the people will do delayed repair of the bile duct. But if you are a proponent of early repair, you have to make sure that you do a CT angiogram and make sure that the hepatic artery is normal. If you have a hepatic artery injury, then you will definitely not do an early repair. You have to delay the repair. So that's a very important point. And we have been listening to bile duct strictures throughout the lockdown lectures in different forms, panel discussions, and this is one of the points repeatedly stressed. Now that's the blood supply, the typical blood supply of the bile duct, the Northover and Terblanche description of the blood supply. And We all know that for the postgraduates, the blood supply of the bile duct is not segmental, it is axial. And nearly 60% of the blood supply is going to come from distal to proximal. That's why whenever you transect the bile duct, invariably they go for stricture, ischemic strictures. Of course, in this particular patient, the hepatic artery injury plus the embolization will definitely contribute to the stricturing process if it's going to occur. So what is the follow-up of this patient? Because we have done an embolization, and this patient comes after 3 months with jaundice. And at that point, we did an MRCP. This shows a bile duct stricture there. And I just want to show all these images, which simply reiterate a fact that science is absolute and it is unforgiving also. So this patient, this is a classical scenario where a right hepatic artery was injured. Probably it formed a pseudoaneurysm which was embolized, and that led to the, you can compare this T-tube cholangiogram with this MR cholangiogram. So that's why it is said that always try to delay the surgery so that the ischemic stricture gets well established and gets stabilized so that you can go and do a delayed repair. So if we can get across this particular message with this case presentation, I think the purpose of presentation is served.
What happened to the T-tube?
So T-tube was removed after we did an embolization. After 1 or 2 weeks, the T-tube was removed. Sir.
No, you should have kept it for a long time. We are supposed to keep it at least for 6 months.
Why, sir?
That will prevent the stricture. That stent would have acted, you know.
Sir, I'm not sure about, because see, this is both a ductal injury plus a vascular insult. And
Yeah,
insult, an insult has been completed by embolization, and we saw that it was you have to occlude the right hepatic completely. So I don't think just retaining the T-tube will have prevented the stricture.
No, we have kept for 6 months.
Okay, sir.
That you know, the tract would have formed, that patency would have maintained.
Okay.
And there's a point in what the Kannan says, because, you know, very aggressive interventional gastroenterologists would like to have some tract from below up, which they can put a couple of stents and dilate it and keep it open. That's possible. Pooval?
That's what I said in the initial picture. Most of the surgeons will agree for whenever there is a bile duct transection, you have some access. Always have a stent in situ before removing the T-tube, because we know that this is going for a stricture. As Shankar is saying that ischemic stricture will develop longer time, but keeping a stent, it is no harm in keeping a tight stent, and we can keep on exchanging it 2 months. The main idea is to prevent the stricture formation. So here we already formed a stricture, a dense stricture. I don't think whether we can do an endoscopic intervention at this moment. Rather than before removing the T-tube, we would put a stent. We keep on exchanging it, we can prevent the stricture formation. That is the basic idea of endoscopic intervention in bile duct injury.
Mani, what's your take?
Yes, I mean, I think Dr. Shankar has beautifully summarized the importance of delaying the repair. But only thing is, if the entire, for me, this kind of an injury, because it's a tight, I mean, the right confluence is not separated. It's we can, at 3 months, we can go in and do a straightforward hedge. But if it's the same patient, it was a type 4 stricture, the right and left were separated, then we would really need to, because the right side anastomosis would normally itself be difficult. With the right hepatic artery gone, the chance of a restricture and recurrent cholangitis in the right lobe would be very, so we might have to plan something more. But like you said, I think delaying the repair to let the stricture evolve is very important. And at this point, it's a straightforward hepatic jejunostomy.
Yeah.
Ilango?
That was done for this patient. Hepatic jejunostomy was done, and now it's 10 years and he's doing well.
How was the right lobe looking like at that point?
It was not necroid. It was normal only, sir.
Okay. Ilango, what is your final comment?
Sir, I actually agree with what Dr. Shankar has done. If we keep a drain, probably the bile duct will invariably, at one point we have to remove the stent, and equal stricture because the hepatic artery supply, right hepatic artery supplies most of the common bile duct. So that stricture will be dense, and the best solution is probably to do a hepatocyginostomy. That it formed a good stricture and led to a dilated duct will lead to a very good hepatocyginostomy and good long-term outcome. That is my feeling.
There's a common point that's always discussed that, let the stricture form and let the proximal biliary tree dilate as much as it can. And I think if Gopal's point is taken that if a stent is in, maybe one is that secondary sclerosing cholangitis one, and two is proximal dilatation may not be significant. Gopal, I mean, that's a good point actually. Dr. Ishwar, you have some comment?
Yeah, surgery would have been inevitable, sir. By keeping the stent, it could have prolonged the condition, but ultimately the patient would have required some form of drainage at the end. So the ideal is take out the stent and allow the stricture to form, allow to dilatation, then do a bypass. That is good enough, sir. That is good enough.
How long was stent in situ after the angiogram? T-tube? How long, I mean, roughly, just to know whether bile was draining or it was only the blood and after that there was no bile, which means that the T-tube, that means there is a definite bile injury and therefore there's of no use of keeping the T-tube in situ. After you treated the hepatic artery aneurysm, what was the bile, what was the T-tube drain like? Any information on that?
Shankar.
No, it was draining bile only, but we removed it after 2 weeks, madam.
Yeah, if it was draining bile, then I think I would agree with Ubal. No, we have a track for repeated dilatation. Maybe, I do not know how the stricture is dense, of course, then hepatocyginostomy would be the way forward, the tight stricture.
As many of the faculty felt that keeping a stent will be delaying the surgery one, and again, proximal ducts may not be that dilated and not very surgeon friendly subsequently. Yeah, any other comments from the floor before Shankar is? Hepatic. Okay, carry on.
No, that's all. I have finished, sir.
I think that's a very interesting discussion. Any other extra comments? Pradhaban, anything you want to finally say? If there are no comments, shall we close the session?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Oh, nice case.
Thank you. Thank you, madam. Thank you.
And we'll see you again tomorrow, same time.
Okay, sir.
Pradhaban, you want to say something? Yeah.
Hello.
Niket, yeah.
Sir, about that one tube you asked, sir, in the very beginning, sir.
Yeah, the wheel and Moss tube. You're having an answer?
Sir, no, sir.
No, wheel and Moss tube is it's a type of T tube where that part of the tube which is going to be within the bile duct, that has a larger caliber.
Yes, sir.
And that part which is going to come out as a smaller caliber. Or I think it's reverse. That part within the bile duct will have a smaller caliber, and which comes out is larger caliber. I have not seen the tube, but it is described in the book. This is mainly for allowing the tract to be larger so that you can do an instrumentation if you find residual stones. I have not seen the tube. I have not used the tube, but that just purely for a interest purpose I put.
Thank you, sir.
What did you want to say?
Yes, sir. Regarding that final word you asked, one patient I had to operate after bile duct injury. This patient had a complete atrophy of right lobe. Only the left lobe was similar. I think a delayed repair, sometimes it can have atrophied right lobe, and the bile duct anastomosis will be purely on the left system.
Okay. So I think that's a wonderful case as usual, Shankar. I think each case is becoming more and more interesting and informative. And I think the discussion on T-tube was very, very timely and very interesting.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Then again, if there are any further comments, then we shall close the session and see you again at 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Yes, sir. Good night, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good
night, all of you. Yeah.